The cruise ship balcony photograph that would destroy Jonathan Miller's understanding of reality was taken innocently enough by his 19-year-old daughter Claire during their family vacation to the Caribbean, a trip intended to celebrate her upcoming college enrollment and create positive memories during a period of significant life transitions. The image, captured on a sunny Tuesday afternoon while their ship was docked in Cozumel, showed the pristine white railings of an adjacent luxury vessel, with passengers visible in the background, enjoying cocktails and conversation in what appeared to be a private deck party for the ship's most exclusive guests. What made this particular photograph devastating was not its composition or technical quality, but rather the unmistakable figure of Elena Miller, Jonathan's wife, who had supposedly died in a boating accident 6 years earlier, standing intimately close to Richard Coleman, Jonathan's boss and the CEO of the construction firm where he had worked for over a decade. Elena's distinctive laugh lines, the scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood accident, and her characteristic way of gesturing while speaking were all clearly visible in the high-resolution image that Claire had taken while trying to capture the impressive scale of the neighboring cruise ship. The recognition was immediate and devastating for Jonathan, who had spent 6 years mourning the woman he believed had drowned during a solo sailing trip off the coast of Martha's Vineyard, a tragedy that had not only destroyed his emotional world, but had also created financial hardship due to the lack of recoverable remains and the complex insurance investigations that had delayed death benefit payments for nearly 2 years. His grief had been compounded by the responsibility of raising Claire as a single father, while managing his own psychological trauma and the practical challenges of maintaining household stability after losing the person who had been both his romantic partner and co-parent for over 20 years. The shock of seeing Elena alive was magnified by her apparent intimacy with Richard Coleman, a man who had been Jonathan's primary source of professional support during the darkest period of his grief, providing job security, financial assistance, and emotional encouragement that had enabled him to maintain his career while processing his devastating loss. Richard's behavior during Jonathan's mourning period had seemed exemplary, demonstrating the kind of compassionate leadership that had made him respected throughout the construction industry, while also earning Jonathan's personal gratitude and professional loyalty. The photograph forced Jonathan to confront the possibility that his wife's death had been an elaborate fiction and that his trusted boss had been complicit in a deception that had caused immeasurable emotional suffering while potentially providing financial and personal benefits to the conspirators. The implications were so overwhelming that Jonathan initially questioned his own perception, wondering if grief and stress had finally manifested in hallucinations, or if his desperate desire to see Elena again had caused him to misidentify strangers whose resemblance had triggered wishful thinking. The investigation that Jonathan felt compelled to undertake began with careful examination of the photograph using digital enhancement techniques that confirmed his initial identification, while also revealing additional details about Elena's appearance and circumstances that suggested she had been living comfortably rather than struggling for survival after her supposed death. Her clothing, jewelry, and general health appeared to indicate access to substantial financial resources and a lifestyle that was inconsistent with someone who had been presumed dead for 6 years. The emotional impact of the discovery was compounded by Jonathan's recent remarriage to Lisa Grant, a colleague who had provided emotional support during his grieving process and had eventually become his romantic partner through what he believed was an authentic connection based on mutual understanding and shared professional interests. The revelation that his first marriage might not have ended with Elena's death created complex feelings of betrayal, confusion, and guilt about his current relationship and his daughter's adjustment to their blended family situation. Claire's reaction to the photograph and her father's obvious distress revealed the depth of trauma that Elena's supposed death had inflicted on their family, as the teenager had spent her formative years processing the loss of her mother, while also serving as emotional support for her grieving father. The possibility that her mother was alive but had chosen to abandon them created a different type of psychological damage that would require professional intervention and family counseling to address appropriately. The decision to investigate further, rather than simply accepting the photograph as evidence of Elena's survival, was motivated by Jonathan's need to understand the full scope of the deception and ensure that appropriate legal action could be taken against those responsible for causing such extensive emotional and financial damage to his family. His methodical approach to gathering evidence reflected both his professional training in project management and his personal determination to uncover the truth, regardless of how painful the revelations might prove to be. The systematic examination of his memories and experiences during Elena's supposed final months revealed inconsistencies and warning signs that he had dismissed at the time as normal relationship stress, but that now appeared potentially significant in understanding how the deception had been planned and executed. Elena's increased focus on financial planning, her secretive phone conversations, and her sudden interest in sailing lessons all took on new meaning when viewed through the lens of someone planning to fake her own death. The confrontation between Jonathan Miller and his daughter Claire occurred in their Boston home 3 days after the cruise ship photograph had shattered his understanding of the past 6 years. As he struggled to find appropriate words to explain that the mother she had mourned throughout her teenage years was apparently alive and living with the man who had signed his paychecks for over a decade, the conversation took place in their kitchen, where they had shared countless meals and family discussions, a setting that emphasized the domestic normalcy that was being destroyed by revelations that challenged everything they thought they knew about their family history and personal identity. Claire's initial response was denial and anger, directed not at her supposedly deceased mother, but at her father for suggesting something so impossible and cruel, reflecting the psychological investment she had made in her grief and her identity as someone whose mother had died tragically during her formative years. Her accusation that Jonathan was experiencing some kind of breakdown, rather than reporting actual facts, demonstrated the difficulty that even family members would have in accepting such a fundamental revision of shared reality and personal history. The detailed examination of the photograph that Jonathan and Claire conducted together revealed unmistakable evidence that the woman in the image was, indeed, Elena, with identifying features that included not only physical characteristics, but also distinctive mannerisms and clothing preferences that were unique to her personality and style. The digital enhancement capabilities available through Jonathan's work connections provided technological verification that eliminated any possibility of mistaken identity, while also documenting evidence that could potentially be used in legal proceedings. The investigation into Richard Coleman's background and financial activities began with Jonathan's careful review of company records and financial documents that he had access to through his senior management position, revealing patterns of unusual expenditures and international travel that coincided with significant events in Elena's supposed disappearance and death investigation. The systematic nature of these financial irregularities suggested careful planning rather than coincidental circumstances, though Jonathan was careful to document everything legally to avoid jeopardizing potential criminal charges. The emotional strain of conducting this investigation, while maintaining normal work relationships with Richard, proved almost unbearable for Jonathan, who was forced to interact professionally with someone he increasingly suspected had orchestrated his wife's fake death while providing false comfort during his grieving process. The psychological complexity of this situation required him to maintain his composure while gathering evidence, creating additional trauma that compounded the original betrayal and deception. The decision to contact law enforcement was delayed by Jonathan's uncertainty about how to present evidence that challenged official findings from 6 years earlier, particularly when his accusations involved his current boss and a case that had been investigated by multiple agencies without uncovering any evidence of fraud or deception. The complexity of proving that someone who had been legally declared dead was actually alive required careful coordination with investigators who had specialized expertise in fraud cases and missing persons investigations. Detective Samuel Wright's initial skepticism about Jonathan's claims was understandable, given the extraordinary nature of his allegations and the potential for psychological explanations related to unresolved grief and recent life changes, though his professional experience with complex fraud cases enabled him to recognize patterns and possibilities that required serious investigation, despite their unusual circumstances. His decision to reopen Elena's case was motivated by both the photographic evidence and Jonathan's credible presentation of his concerns and supporting documentation. The investigation into Elena's original disappearance revealed procedural shortcuts and investigative limitations that had made it possible for a sophisticated deception to succeed, including the lack of body recovery, witness testimony that was never thoroughly verified, and financial arrangements that should have triggered additional scrutiny but were accepted at face value due to the apparent tragedy of the circumstances. These revelations highlighted systematic problems in how missing person cases were investigated and closed, particularly when they involved presumed deaths without recovered remains. The psychological evaluation that Jonathan underwent as part of the renewed investigation confirmed his mental stability and credibility, while also providing professional assessment of the trauma he had experienced through 6 years of unnecessary grief and the recent discovery that his mourning had been based on elaborate lies. The evaluation was essential for establishing his reliability as a witness, while also documenting the emotional damage that had been caused by the conspiracy. The financial investigation that accompanied the criminal inquiry revealed sophisticated money laundering and asset hiding techniques that had enabled Elena and Richard to maintain their relationship and lifestyle while avoiding detection by law enforcement or insurance investigators who might have been suspicious of unusual financial activities following Elena's supposed death. The complexity of these arrangements suggested professional assistance and substantial resources that went beyond what individual criminals might typically be able to accomplish independently. If you're enjoying these true crime stories, please consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow and allows us to keep making more videos for you. Also, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The systematic investigation that Detective Wright conducted into Elena Miller's supposed death revealed a complex web of fabricated evidence and coordinated deception that had required extensive planning and substantial financial resources to execute successfully, suggesting that her disappearance was part of a sophisticated criminal enterprise rather than a desperate improvisation by individuals acting alone. The examination of Coast Guard records, witness statements, and physical evidence from the original investigation uncovered numerous inconsistencies and gaps that should have prompted more thorough scrutiny, but were overlooked due to assumptions about the tragedy of the circumstances and the apparent credibility of the witnesses involved. The boat that Elena had supposedly been sailing when she disappeared was discovered to have been deliberately damaged to create evidence of a maritime accident, with the damage pattern being inconsistent with the weather conditions and navigational hazards that were claimed to have caused the incident. The forensic analysis of the vessel revealed that the damage had been created using tools and techniques that suggested deliberate sabotage rather than accidental collision or storm damage, providing crucial evidence that Elena's disappearance had been staged rather than the result of tragic circumstances. The witness testimony that had supported the original conclusion of accidental death was found to be fabricated, with individuals who claimed to have seen Elena's boat in distress, later admitting under renewed questioning that they had been paid to provide false statements that would support the narrative of a sailing accident. The systematic nature of these false testimonies indicated coordination and planning that extended far beyond what Elena and Richard could have accomplished without additional assistance from other conspirators. The insurance investigation that had been conducted following Elena's supposed death was revealed to have been compromised by conflicts of interest and fraudulent documentation that had enabled substantial payouts to be made based on insufficient evidence and falsified claims, creating financial incentives for multiple parties to support the deception rather than conduct thorough investigations. The amount of money involved in these fraudulent claims was substantial enough to have funded the conspiracy, while also providing ongoing financial support for Elena and Richard's relationship and lifestyle. The international travel records that Detective Wright obtained through federal law enforcement connections revealed that Elena had been using false identification documents to travel extensively during the years following her supposed death, with destinations that included countries with limited extradition agreements and banking secrecy laws that would have made it difficult for American investigators to trace her activities or financial transactions. The sophistication of her false identity documents suggested access to criminal networks that specialized in identity fraud and document forgery. The surveillance operation that was established to monitor Richard Coleman's activities revealed ongoing criminal behavior that included money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit fraud, with evidence suggesting that Elena's fake death was part of a larger criminal enterprise that involved multiple schemes and victims over an extended period. The scale and complexity of Richard's criminal activities explained how he had been able to provide the resources and expertise necessary to orchestrate Elena's disappearance, while also maintaining his legitimate business, operations, and public reputation. The psychological profile that was developed for Elena based on interviews with friends, family members, and former colleagues revealed personality traits and behavioral patterns that were consistent with someone capable of elaborate deception and manipulation, including a history of financial irresponsibility, relationship instability, and dishonest behavior that had been rationalized or minimized by people who cared about her. The pattern of behavior suggested that her fake death was an escalation of existing criminal tendencies rather than an isolated incident of desperate circumstances. The impact on Claire Miller of learning that her mother was alive but had chosen to abandon her family became a central concern for the investigation, as her testimony and cooperation would be essential for prosecution, while her emotional welfare required careful protection from additional trauma related to the ongoing legal proceedings. The specialized counseling and support services that were arranged for Claire addressed both her immediate psychological needs and the long-term implications of discovering that her fundamental understanding of her family history had been based on lies. The coordination between multiple law enforcement agencies that was required for the investigation reflected the international scope of the conspiracy and the need for specialized expertise in financial crimes, fraud investigation, and international fugitive apprehension, creating logistical challenges that tested the capabilities of the criminal justice system, while also demonstrating the resources required to combat sophisticated white-collar crime effectively. The media attention that the case attracted brought public awareness to the vulnerability of grieving families to exploitation by trusted associates and the systematic problems in death investigation procedures that had enabled such an elaborate deception to succeed for 6 years without detection, highlighting the need for enhanced training and resources for investigators handling cases involving presumed death without recovered remains. The civil litigation that Jonathan initiated against Richard Coleman's company and the insurance companies that had paid fraudulent claims provided opportunities for financial recovery, while also establishing legal precedents for corporate responsibility in cases involving employee misconduct and fraud, though the complexity of proving damages and establishing liability created lengthy legal proceedings that extended the family's trauma and uncertainty. The arrest of Richard Coleman took place at his office in downtown Boston during regular business hours, conducted by federal agents who had coordinated with local law enforcement to ensure that all aspects of his criminal enterprise could be addressed simultaneously through searches of his business premises, personal residences, and financial institutions where he maintained accounts. The public nature of his arrest was both necessary for preventing him from destroying evidence or fleeing the jurisdiction and symbolic of how his crimes had been conducted openly, while hiding in plain sight through his legitimate business, operations, and community standing. The search warrants that were executed simultaneously at multiple locations revealed extensive evidence of the conspiracy to fake Elena's death, including financial records, communication logs, and physical evidence that demonstrated the careful planning and substantial resources that had been devoted to creating and maintaining the deception over 6 years. The discovery of this evidence confirmed the scope of the criminal enterprise, while also providing prosecutors with comprehensive documentation that would be essential for securing convictions and recovering stolen assets. Elena's location and arrest required international cooperation and diplomatic coordination, as she had been living under false identity in a country that did not have automatic extradition agreements with the United States, creating legal and procedural complications that delayed her apprehension, while also providing her with opportunities to destroy additional evidence and transfer assets to accounts that would be more difficult for American authorities to access and freeze. The cooperation that Elena eventually provided with investigators was motivated by plea bargain negotiations that offered reduced sentences in exchange for comprehensive testimony about the conspiracy and assistance in recovering assets that had been obtained through fraudulent means. Though her credibility as a witness was compromised by her central role in the crimes and her obvious motivation to minimize her own culpability while maximizing blame for her co-conspirators. The psychological evaluation of Elena that was conducted as part of the legal proceedings revealed complex personality disorders and moral reasoning deficits that explained her ability to maintain elaborate deceptions while causing severe emotional damage to her own family, including her husband and daughter who had genuinely mourned her supposed death for years. The clinical assessment provided insights into her motivations and methods, while also supporting arguments about her competency to stand trial and the likelihood of rehabilitation through incarceration and treatment. The impact on Jonathan's current marriage to Lisa Grant became a significant complication as the investigation progressed, creating emotional strain and practical difficulties that threatened their relationship, while also raising questions about the timing and circumstances of their romantic involvement that might be relevant to the criminal case. The revelation that Jonathan's first marriage had not ended with Elena's death created complex legal and emotional issues that required careful handling to protect both Lisa's interests and the integrity of the investigation. The financial investigation revealed that the proceeds from Elena's fraudulent death benefits had been used to fund Richard's business expansion and personal investments, creating a trail of financial crimes that extended far beyond the original conspiracy to include tax evasion, securities fraud, and money laundering that involved multiple financial institutions and professional service providers who had either been deceived or complicit in the criminal activities. The corporate investigation that was conducted into Richard's business operations revealed a pattern of fraud and misconduct that extended throughout his company, affecting employees, contractors, and clients who had been victimized by various schemes that used the legitimate construction business as cover for more extensive criminal activities. The scope of these crimes necessitated additional investigations and prosecutions that would take years to complete, while also creating liability issues for innocent parties who had been unknowingly involved in criminal transactions. The victim impact assessment that was conducted for Jonathan and Claire revealed the extensive psychological damage that had been caused by the conspiracy, including not only the original trauma of grieving Elena's supposed death, but also the additional trauma of discovering that their mourning had been unnecessary and that trusted individuals had deliberately caused their suffering for personal gain. The comprehensive documentation of this damage would be essential for sentencing proceedings and civil litigation, while also providing foundation for therapeutic interventions. The plea negotiations that were conducted with various co-conspirators revealed the full extent of the criminal network that had supported Elena's fake death, including professionals who had provided false documentation, financial services, and other specialized assistance that enabled the conspiracy to succeed while avoiding detection by law enforcement and insurance investigators. The cooperation agreements that were reached with some of these individuals provided prosecutors with additional evidence, while also demonstrating the resources and expertise required for such sophisticated criminal enterprises. The media coverage of the arrests and charges brought national attention to the case, while also highlighting systematic vulnerabilities in death investigation procedures and insurance fraud prevention that had enabled such an elaborate deception to succeed for years without detection, prompting discussions about needed reforms in law enforcement training and interagency cooperation for complex fraud cases. The trial proceedings began 18 months after the initial arrests, with federal prosecutors presenting comprehensive evidence of a conspiracy that had defrauded insurance companies of over $2 million, while causing immeasurable emotional damage to Jonathan and Claire Miller through 6 years of unnecessary grief and psychological trauma. The complexity of the case required extensive expert testimony about financial crimes, forensic evidence, and psychological manipulation, creating a lengthy trial process that tested the endurance of all participants while providing detailed public examination of sophisticated criminal techniques. The prosecution's case was built around the systematic deception that Elena and Richard had employed to fake her death while maintaining their romantic relationship and lavish lifestyle funded by fraudulent insurance proceeds, with evidence including the doctored boat accident, false witness testimony, forged documents, and the extensive money laundering operation that had enabled them to enjoy their criminal proceeds without detection. The comprehensive nature of the evidence made it difficult for the defense to challenge individual elements while also demonstrating the premeditated and calculated nature of the conspiracy. Elena's testimony as a cooperating witness provided crucial insider knowledge about the planning and execution of the fake death scheme, though her credibility was challenged by defense attorneys who argued that her cooperation was motivated solely by plea agreement benefits rather than genuine remorse or commitment to truthfulness. Her detailed accounts of the conspiracy's development and implementation provided prosecutors with essential evidence, while also revealing the psychological callousness required to cause such extensive suffering to her own family. Richard Coleman's defense strategy focused on minimizing his role in the conspiracy while portraying him as a victim of Elena's manipulation and emotional coercion, arguing that his genuine feelings for her had been exploited to secure his cooperation in schemes that he hadn't fully understood or intended to support. This approach required acknowledging some criminal activity while attempting to reduce his culpability and potential sentence, though the extensive evidence of his leadership role and financial benefits made this strategy largely ineffective. The testimony that Jonathan provided about the impact of the conspiracy on his family was emotionally devastating but legally essential for establishing the human cost of the defendant's crimes, including not only the financial losses but also the psychological trauma that had affected every aspect of his and Claire's lives for 6 years. His detailed account of the grieving process and the ways that Elena's supposed death had shaped their family's decisions and relationships provided the jury with clear understanding of why the conspiracy deserved severe punishment. Claire's testimony was particularly powerful because of her age and the unique perspective she could provide about losing her mother during her formative teenage years. Though the court took special precautions to protect her emotional welfare, while ensuring that her voice could be heard in the proceedings that would determine justice for crimes that had profoundly affected her development and family relationships. The financial expert testimony revealed the sophisticated money laundering techniques that had been employed to hide the fraudulent insurance proceeds, while also funding Elena and Richard's lifestyle, including offshore accounts, shell corporations, and investment vehicles that demonstrated professional-level expertise in financial crimes. The complexity of these arrangements indicated that the conspiracy had involved additional professionals who provided specialized services for criminal enterprises. The psychological expert testimony addressed the long-term impact of elaborate deception on victims' mental health, while also providing analysis of the personality disorders and moral reasoning deficits that enabled the defendants to maintain their crimes over extended periods while causing severe harm to people they claimed to care about. This testimony was essential for helping the jury understand both the victim's ongoing trauma and the defendant's likelihood of rehabilitation through incarceration and treatment. The defense's attempts to generate sympathy for Elena by emphasizing her troubled background and mental health issues were undermined by evidence of the careful planning and sophisticated execution that the conspiracy had required, demonstrating that her actions reflected calculated decision-making rather than impulsive responses to emotional or psychological distress. The systematic nature of the deception indicated clear understanding of the consequences while showing deliberate choice to proceed despite the harm that would be caused to innocent victims. The international cooperation that had been required for the investigation was highlighted through testimony from foreign law enforcement officials who had assisted in tracking Elena's activities and financial transactions during her years of hiding, demonstrating both the global scope of modern criminal enterprises and the enhanced cooperation that was necessary for effective prosecution of sophisticated white-collar crimes. The insurance industry expert testimony revealed systematic vulnerabilities in fraud detection procedures that had enabled the conspiracy to succeed, while also explaining the reforms that had been implemented in response to the case to prevent similar sophisticated deceptions in the future, though the witnesses acknowledged that determined criminals with sufficient resources could still exploit remaining weaknesses in the system. The jury's deliberation lasted 4 days, reflecting the complexity of the evidence and the serious nature of the charges, while also demonstrating their careful consideration of the defendants' respective roles in the conspiracy and the appropriate level of accountability for crimes that had caused both financial losses and extensive emotional trauma to innocent victims. The unanimous guilty verdicts on all major charges validated the prosecution's comprehensive case, while also providing Jonathan and Claire with official recognition that their suffering had been the result of deliberate criminal conduct, rather than tragic circumstances beyond anyone's control. The sentencing phase of the proceedings focused on determining appropriate punishment that would reflect both the financial scope of the crimes and the psychological damage that had been inflicted on the victims, with victim impact statements providing detailed accounts of how the conspiracy had affected every aspect of the Miller family's life, while expert testimony established the long-term consequences of such elaborate deception on victims' ability to trust others and form healthy relationships. Richard Coleman received 25 years in federal prison for his leadership role in the conspiracy, with the judge emphasizing that his abuse of his position of trust with Jonathan and his company's resources to facilitate crimes against his own employee demonstrated exceptional callousness and moral corruption that deserved severe punishment. The sentence also included substantial financial restitution and asset forfeiture that would help compensate the victims, while also eliminating Richard's ability to enjoy the proceeds of his crimes. Elena's sentence of 18 years reflected both her central role in the conspiracy and her cooperation with the investigation, though the judge made clear that her cooperation could not fully mitigate the cruelty of causing her own family to grieve her supposed death for 6 years while she enjoyed a lavish lifestyle funded by their suffering. The sentence included mandatory psychological treatment and ongoing supervision that addressed her personality disorders while attempting to prevent future criminal behavior. The co-conspirators who had provided professional services to support the fake death scheme received sentences ranging from probation to 10 years in prison, depending on their level of involvement and cooperation with the investigation, establishing legal precedents for holding professional service providers accountable when they assist in sophisticated criminal enterprises, even when they claim to have been unaware of the ultimate criminal purposes. The civil litigation that followed the criminal proceedings resulted in substantial financial settlements from insurance companies and Richard's business enterprises, providing Jonathan and Claire with compensation for their losses, while also establishing corporate liability for employee criminal conduct that utilizes company resources and positions of trust. The settlements included provisions for ongoing counseling and support services that address the long-term psychological impact of the conspiracy. The regulatory changes that were implemented in response to the case included enhanced training for death investigators, improved coordination between law enforcement agencies and insurance companies, and strengthened procedures for verifying presumed death cases that lack recovered remains, creating systematic improvements that would help prevent similar sophisticated deceptions in the future. The psychological treatment that Jonathan and Claire received during and after the legal proceedings addressed the complex trauma associated with learning that their grief had been unnecessary, while also helping them process feelings of betrayal, anger, and confusion about their family relationships and personal identity that had been shaped by 6 years of believing in Elena's death. The therapeutic process was essential for their recovery, while also providing insights that could help other victims of similar elaborate deceptions. The impact on Jonathan's marriage to Lisa Grant required specialized counseling that addressed the unique challenges of discovering that a previous marriage had not ended as believed, while also maintaining trust and communication in their current relationship, demonstrating the ripple effects of sophisticated criminal deception that extended beyond the immediate victims to affect everyone connected to their lives. The media coverage of the trial and sentencing brought national attention to the vulnerability of grieving families to exploitation by trusted individuals, while also highlighting the sophisticated techniques that modern criminals could employ to maintain elaborate deceptions for extended periods, contributing to public awareness and education about financial fraud and psychological manipulation. The establishment of support services for families affected by similar crimes grew out of recognition that the Miller family's experience was not unique and that other victims of elaborate deception and fraud needed specialized assistance that addressed both the practical and emotional challenges of recovering from systematic betrayal by trusted individuals. The aftermath of the trial brought both relief and ongoing challenges for Jonathan Miller, as the legal validation of his family's victimization provided closure regarding the criminal conspiracy, while also forcing him to confront the reality that 6 years of his life had been defined by elaborate lies that had shaped every major decision he had made during that period. The process of rebuilding his identity and relationships required extensive therapeutic intervention and the support of family and friends who understood that his healing would be a long-term process rather than an immediate result of justice being served. The relationship between Jonathan and his daughter Claire evolved during their shared recovery process as they worked together to process the trauma of discovering that Elena was alive, while also rebuilding their family identity without the foundational narrative of tragic loss that had previously defined their bond. Their counseling sessions revealed both the strength of their relationship and the ways that Elena's deception had affected their communication and trust, requiring careful work to establish new patterns of honesty and emotional openness. The investigation into other potential victims of Richard Coleman's criminal enterprises revealed that Jonathan's case was part of a larger pattern of exploitation and fraud that had affected multiple families and business associates over many years, leading to additional prosecutions and civil litigation that demonstrated the systematic nature of white-collar crime and the need for enhanced protection for vulnerable individuals who trusted professional relationships and family connections. The insurance industry's response to the case included comprehensive reforms in fraud detection and prevention procedures that addressed the specific vulnerabilities that had been exploited in Elena's fake death scheme, while also improving coordination with law enforcement agencies to ensure that suspicious claims would receive appropriate investigation before benefits were paid to potentially fraudulent beneficiaries. The corporate culture changes that were implemented at Richard's former company included enhanced ethics training, improved oversight of executive behavior, and stronger policies regarding conflicts of interest and abuse of employee relationships, creating systematic protections that would help prevent future exploitation of workers by their supervisors and company leadership. Detective Samuel Wright's investigation techniques and case management approaches became models for other law enforcement agencies, handling complex fraud cases involving presumed death and elaborate deception, contributing to enhanced training programs and procedural improvements that would help investigators recognize and respond to similar sophisticated criminal schemes. The academic research that was prompted by the case contributed to enhanced understanding of the psychological techniques used in long-term deception, while also advancing knowledge about the impact of elaborate fraud on victims' mental health and their ability to form trusting relationships after experiencing systematic betrayal by people they had believed were trustworthy and caring. The legislative initiatives that were supported by victim advocates and law enforcement officials included enhanced penalties for fraud crimes involving family relationships and positions of trust, improved resources for victims of elaborate deception schemes, and strengthened international cooperation agreements that would facilitate investigation and prosecution of crimes that crossed jurisdictional boundaries. Jonathan's decision to speak publicly about his experience, despite the personal embarrassment and emotional difficulty involved, demonstrated remarkable courage, while also providing other victims with validation and support for reporting similar crimes, contributing to enhanced public awareness about sophisticated fraud techniques and the importance of maintaining appropriate skepticism, even in relationships involving trusted family members and professional associates. The psychological research that Jonathan and Claire participated in provided valuable data about the long-term impact of elaborate deception on family relationships, while also contributing to the development of more effective therapeutic interventions for individuals recovering from systematic manipulation and betrayal by trusted individuals who had exploited their emotional vulnerability for criminal purposes. The financial recovery process that Jonathan undertook required careful management of the substantial settlements and restitution awards, while also addressing the psychological challenges of benefiting financially from the criminal prosecution of his wife and former boss, creating complex emotional issues that required ongoing therapeutic support and financial counseling to resolve appropriately. The reconstruction of Jonathan's relationship with Elena after her conviction and incarceration proved to be one of the most challenging aspects of his recovery process, as he struggled to balance his anger and sense of betrayal with his desire to understand her motivations and potentially provide Claire with some form of maternal connection, despite the devastating nature of Elena's crimes. The supervised prison visits that were eventually arranged required extensive preparation and therapeutic support, while also providing opportunities for limited communication that addressed practical issues related to their daughter's welfare and emotional needs. The impact on Claire's transition to college was significant, as the revelation about her mother's criminal activities occurred during a crucial period of her academic and social development, requiring specialized counseling and support services that helped her maintain her educational goals while processing the complex emotions associated with learning that her fundamental understanding of her family history had been based on lies and manipulation. The marriage counseling that Jonathan and Lisa undertook addressed the unique challenges of maintaining their relationship while processing the discovery that Jonathan's previous marriage had not ended as believed, creating trust and communication issues that required professional intervention and ongoing support to resolve successfully. Their ability to work through these challenges together demonstrated the strength of their relationship, while also providing a model for other couples facing similar circumstances. The community response to the case included both support for the Miller family and criticism of the institutions and individuals who had failed to detect the elaborate deception despite multiple opportunities for more thorough investigation, highlighting systematic problems in fraud prevention and victim protection that required ongoing attention and reform to address effectively. The international cooperation that had been essential for investigating and prosecuting the case continued through ongoing efforts to recover assets that had been hidden in foreign accounts and to identify other potential victims of similar criminal networks operating across multiple jurisdictions, demonstrating the need for enhanced global coordination in combating sophisticated white-collar crime. The documentary film that was produced about the case brought widespread public attention to the sophisticated techniques used by modern criminals to exploit trust relationships, while also providing educational content that helped potential victims recognize warning signs and understand the importance of maintaining appropriate skepticism, even in close personal and professional relationships. The victim advocacy work that Jonathan eventually undertook grew out of his recognition that his experience could help other families who had been victimized by similar elaborate deception schemes, providing them with practical guidance and emotional support, while also contributing to enhanced public awareness about fraud prevention and victim protection. The psychological research that continued to grow out of the case contributed to enhanced understanding of how elaborate deception affected family relationships, while also advancing knowledge about effective therapeutic interventions for individuals recovering from systematic betrayal by trusted family members and professional associates who had exploited their emotional vulnerability for criminal purposes. The legal precedents that were established through the case influenced subsequent prosecutions of complex fraud schemes, while also contributing to enhanced protection for victims who needed support navigating difficult legal proceedings and recovery processes that could extend for years after the initial criminal activity was discovered and prosecuted. The ongoing impact of the case on insurance industry practices included not only improved fraud detection procedures, but also enhanced cooperation with law enforcement agencies and better training for investigators who handled claims involving presumed death or other circumstances that might be exploited by sophisticated criminals seeking to defraud insurance companies and their legitimate beneficiaries. The corporate governance reforms that were implemented in response to the case included stronger oversight of executive behavior and enhanced protection for employees who might be vulnerable to exploitation by supervisors who abused their positions of trust for personal gain, creating systematic improvements that would help prevent similar criminal activities in other workplace environments. The establishment of the Miller Family Foundation 5 years after Elena's conviction represented Jonathan's transformation from victim to advocate, creating a permanent institution dedicated to supporting families affected by elaborate deception schemes, while also funding research and education initiatives that address the sophisticated techniques used by criminals to exploit trust relationships for financial and personal gain. The foundation's work included direct support for victims, enhanced training for law enforcement and insurance professionals, and public education campaigns that raised awareness about fraud prevention and recognition. The International Conference on Family Fraud that the foundation sponsored annually brought together survivors, law enforcement officials, researchers, and policymakers from around the world to share knowledge and coordinate efforts to combat sophisticated criminal enterprises that exploited personal relationships and professional trust for criminal purposes. The conference proceedings contributed to enhanced cooperation between agencies, while also providing victims with platforms for advocacy and mutual support that facilitated their recovery and empowerment. The training programs that Jonathan developed for law enforcement agencies included specialized techniques for investigating complex fraud cases, while also providing officers with understanding of the psychological impact of elaborate deception on victims and the importance of trauma-informed investigation methods that protected victims' emotional welfare while gathering necessary evidence for prosecution. The research initiatives that the foundation funded contributed to enhanced understanding of the psychological techniques used by sophisticated criminals, while also advancing knowledge about effective prevention strategies and therapeutic interventions for individuals recovering from systematic manipulation and betrayal by trusted family members and professional associates. The legislative advocacy that Jonathan undertook included support for enhanced penalties for fraud crimes involving positions of trust and family relationships, improved resources for victims seeking justice and recovery, and strengthened international cooperation agreements that facilitated investigation and prosecution of crimes that crossed jurisdictional boundaries while exploiting cultural and legal differences. The corporate consulting services that Jonathan provided to businesses seeking to prevent employee exploitation and fraud included assessment of organizational vulnerabilities, development of enhanced oversight procedures, and training for management personnel about recognizing and responding to potential criminal activity involving abuse of trust, relationships, and professional positions. The psychological treatment protocols that were developed through the Foundation's research provided specialized approaches for helping families recover from elaborate deception, while also addressing the unique challenges faced by children and adolescents, whose development had been affected by systematic lies about fundamental family relationships and personal history. The insurance industry partnerships that the Foundation established contributed to ongoing improvements in fraud detection and prevention, while also providing enhanced support for legitimate beneficiaries who needed assistance navigating complex claims processes that had been complicated by criminal activity or sophisticated deception schemes. The media initiatives that the Foundation supported included documentary films, educational materials, and public awareness campaigns that provided practical information about fraud prevention, while also reducing stigma associated with victimization by trusted family members and professional associates who exploited emotional vulnerability for criminal purposes. The International Victim Support Network that developed around the Foundation's work provided ongoing assistance for families affected by similar crimes, while also maintaining political pressure for continued improvements in prevention, investigation, and prosecution of sophisticated fraud schemes that exploited trust, relationships, and cultural differences to avoid detection and accountability. The academic partnerships that the Foundation established with universities and research institutions contributed to ongoing study of criminal deception techniques, while also training new generations of researchers, law enforcement professionals, and victim advocates, who would continue advancing knowledge and practice in combating sophisticated white-collar crime.